Now, the Russian invasion into Ukraine has displaced more than 1 million people, with millions more at risk. The European Union nations have been pretty swift in their response to the Ukrainians who are crossing over the border from Ukraine into the neighbouring nations. Now, the reaction of the European nations is now pushing millions of Middle Eastern refugees who are still waiting for protection and asylum for over a decade later for a comparison of the manner in which the Ukrainian refugees are being dealt with from the manner in which refugees from Middle East and Africa were dealt with. This has also brought to fore the clear double standards and also the problem of racism while dealing with refugees in Europe. Our next report gets you the details.
In a week since the Russian invasion of Ukraine, the war has displaced 1 million people, millions more at risk of being displaced. They crossed over the borders to mainly Poland, Romania, Moldova and Slovakia. In the wake of the humanitarian crisis, European nations have been swift in their response, with residents pitching in to shelter refugees and governments mobilizing aid and allowances. Ahmed al-Hariri is a Syrian refugee who is having a rather hard time ignoring the different treatment meted out to Middle East refugees by Europe.
We are wondering, why are Ukrainians welcome in all countries while we Syrian refugees are still in tents and remain under the snow, under death, and no one is looking at?
It's been over a decade since the war in Syria that displaced 12 million people. It took European nations 10 years to shelter 1 million Syrian refugees. Now one can't help but ask why there are still thousands of refugees from the Middle East living in precarious tents in the biting cold, hoping for a better future. Europe's response to the Ukrainian refugees, though commendable, has brought to light its double standards. Just last year, Poland faced criticism for pushing back asylum seekers from Middle East crossing over from Belarus. The border standoff made headlines across the globe.
Another clear example, I think, of double standards is this idea, again, on refugees, but also on transferring weaponry or even allowing citizens to go and fight in Ukraine for their causes. Whereas if people had shown solidarity by flying to Libya or Syria, suddenly they were automatically considered as, security threats.
The disparity and blatant segregation was also on display in reportage by certain media outlets of the situation in Ukraine and of the refugee crisis that the Russian invasion has triggered. Though Europe's treatment of Ukrainians has sparked off a heightened sense of abandonment, refugees and critics also lay equal blame on their Middle Eastern brethren. Other countries that chose to remain mum on the crisis and apathetic in their response to taking in those displaced by the war in Syria. Bureau Report WION World is One.
Meanwhile, reports have emerged about serious discrimination along the borders of Poland and Hungary and Ukraine as hundreds of people are waiting to escape from the conflict zone for their safety. The WION's correspondent Anas Malik in fact sent us this report from the Medica border crossing along the Poland and Ukraine border. Listen in.
Well, I'm at the Medica border crossing. Behind me, you can see that's the Medica border crossing. Those barriers that you see, that's the Medica border crossing. And the only vehicles, the only thing that is going in are vehicles, some of them mostly empty, into Ukraine, whereas hundreds, literally hundreds of people are coming out from Ukraine to Poland into safety. Now, we've seen camps have been set up. Volunteers, there's an army of volunteers as well on this side of the border who are eagerly waiting to accommodate those refugees as well. They're bringing in warm clothes. There's a fire pit around. But the stories that come out from here are pretty harrowing as well. They're pretty emotional. Most of the people say that they would want the international community to do more to help the Ukrainian people as they're attacked. But by and large, they would want to go back to their country and serve back to their country, but not in these circumstances. Anas Malik in Medica, Poland, for WION World is One.
WION is now available in your country. Download the app now and get all the news on the move.